So I welcome Dr. Devrat Sharma, who has joined us. And Dr. Sharma, we're waiting for some more students to join us. So we are 35 of them. So let us hope some more join us, and then we'll start.
Yes, hi. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, in the meanwhile, we can.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're perfectly audible. Yeah, perfectly fine. Audible and visible both.
Oh, thank you.
So I think let us start, or maybe we are just 11 of us, 11 plus 2, 13.
Shall I?
Dr. Sharma, I'll brief you about our students. We have students from all across the country, down south Kerala, in the north Kashmir, northeast. Also, we have some students, and then we have students from Bihar, UP, all across the country. So in all, there are 35 of them. So let us see how many of them are able to join this. And this session is being recorded. So those of you who have some connectivity issue, or those who are not able to join, will get the recording once the session is over. And after the session is over, we'll break for a few minutes, and then we'll start another meeting, because this session, along with the with my class, will go too long. So we'll break after Dr. Sharma winds up with his session, and thereafter then we'll start our class at 12, or maybe a little after 12. Okay, I think we'll start, and maybe people will be joining us. So I'll start with the introduction of our resource person, Dr. Devrat Sharma, who's working as Associate Professor in a government college in Rajasthan, which is affiliated to Rajasthan University. Dr. Sharma worked on the poetry of T.S. Eliot for his PhD degree. He is recipient of Teacher Research Fellowship by the UGC. His area of interest and specialization are Indian and Western literary theory and criticism, Indian philosophy and ethos, comparative literature. He's a prolific writer of short stories. His stories have been published by Sahitya Academy New Delhi, The Setu, Muse India, Indian Ruminations, The Text, and other literary journals and magazines. His research papers have been published in international and national journals on Indian literary theory and aesthetics, comparative literature, translations, Indian philosophy, metaphysics, modern Western philosophy, and film studies. Apart from this, he has presented papers in various international and national conferences and seminars. He's been a resource person for designing various courses for college and university teachers. He was a master trainer in Project High Tech, where he trained teachers to teach English communicatively. He also acted as a consultant to RCEE and wrote and compiled a module for teacher training in communicative skills. He's also conducted various courses in communication skills and personality development, has also made presentations on Doordarshan on communication skills and the role of English language. So on to you, Dr. Sharma. Please take over. And please let me know when I have to start the slide projection.
You
Over
can
to
have
you.
the first slide right straight away.
Okay.
The introduction. Okay. I hope I'm audible and visible as well.
Is the slide visible to all? Is the slide visible? Oh, wait a minute. I think I'll have to share it.
Is it all right?
Yeah. Is the slide visible now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
sir.
Yes. Dr. Sharma, please continue.
Yep. Yeah. So first of all, I must thank Professor Arora for inviting me. And we have a long association of working together, sharing our meals together. And it's always a pleasure moment whenever I'm there. I've been there earlier also on a couple of occasions, but online is the first time that I'm addressing the students of the Central University. So I want this session to be a little interactive in the sense because I assume there'd be a lot of questions. And to start with, I have a presumption that many of the students are not well versed with the Indian literary theory, the whole canon of Sanskrit literature and the associated philosophy and theory together. So with this presumption, I would be very, superficial in introducing the subject to you, because, and I hope I would get another chance, maybe a couple of chances, so that we can get into some detail about it. So let me just begin with the idea of criticism, how the word criticism is taken up in West and in the Indian connotation. So criticism is what it's basically an appreciation. We have standards how a work of art is to be judged in its contemporaneous, how contemporary it is, it's relative to the works done earlier, whether it is matching up with the earlier work in terms of standards, and it's roundabout coming about the term aesthetics. The core ethics comes in between. We have certain prominent critics who would want, for that instance, Dryden in West, and we have Munshi Premchand in India. Munshi Premchand said, we cannot think of aesthetics in a country which is starving. And that would be too leftiest assumption, but you see, we have ethics coming in between. So the conception of Indian aesthetics is different. And how it is different from West is how our philosophy is different from the Western philosophy. First of all, we have to take into consideration that the Indian sensibility, the Indian mind regulated about, and they perceive life in totality. What is presumptuous about the Western theory is that it's in bits and pieces. You have a specific area, a couple of decades that something would last, then very soon it will be replaced by something else, then to be replaced further by another theory. For instance, you have the neo-romantics, followed by romantics, by the Victorians, then you have the pre-modernist, then the modernist, then postmodernism, structuralism, post-structuralism, postmodernism. Whereas Indian theory, if you call it theory at all, has stuck to its roots. There has been no change whatsoever. It is very comprehensive, very clear in terms of its linguistic analysis, in terms of its mental perceptions. And that again is because we have visualized theory or aesthetics as a part, something corresponding to the Purushastras. We have the four Purushastra, so it is something which is corresponding to the Purushastra. So now here we have, Sanjeev, can we have the first slide, please? Here we have aesthetics is produced in terms of a sensuous garb. We never had any apprehensions when you go back into the, even for that matter, the medieval architecture. You have in central India, temples of central India, you have the Ellora art, you have the Ajanta art. Though there's no inhibition. The presentation of beauty in terms of a sensuous acknowledgement has always been there. And when Brahma, who is supposed to be the person who brought about the first doctrine, the first draft, as you might say, of criticism. So here he was borrowing from somebody, from almost all the Vedas. For instance, you have the Rig Veda as being there, the Sam Veda is mentioned, and particularly when you come down to the Athar Veda, Ras is prominent. So the basic thing is Ras and the Dhwani theories on which we would concentrate for the present duration of the lecture. And there are other Nirukta, etymology, then language studies, and so many things are still there. So we would not be talking about them. Here particularly we will concentrate on the Ras and the Dhwani theories. So before getting into what Ras is, let us talk about whether we need a theory to justify something. Fine, you can use Western perfume, you can use Western clothing, but culture, it's uprooting Western culture and fixing it up here. Would that make any sense? And a healthy sort of understanding, you have to think about that also. So first of all, what is important is that the Indian theory is something which took its birth from this native soil, was true to the totality concept of life, and which catered to the Indian thought and philosophy. And when we talk about the Western theories, it's more of the sociological or the economical perceptions that are being dominated, or they are taken into consideration when you talk about those theories. Whereas when we talk about the Indian theory, we say, can we have the next slide, please, sir? Yes. First of all, when we talk about the excess that the fine arts that we talk about is the Vastu Brahmvad, the Nad Brahmvad, and the Ras Brahmvad. These are in additions to the 5 fine arts that the West conceived. Vastu, I hope you all are familiar. Nad is not music, as Ras is not catharsis. Nad is not music, as Ras is not catharsis. So Nad, if you're familiar with the Sufi theories also, and if you're familiar with the Nad Brahma theory in Indian philosophy, so it is the primordial sound. We have the grammarians in Panini and Patanjali when they talk about the ontological perspectives where sound is made to happen in such a way. Look, I think I'm sounding a little, wayward. I'll give you an example from my experience. When I confronted the Rig Veda in the translation, because Sanskrit, then of course I couldn't read. So with my experience with Rig Veda in the terms of translation that I was reading, so I couldn't make anything out of it. It appeared to be a very prehistoric society, people talking about fire, people talking about stones. They are worshipping Indra for rain. They are asking for boons. They're talking about a war, 10 king wars, Dasa and subjugation of one king, maybe the beginning of the monarchy. So all those things were there, but there was nothing what we could say something spiritual or ontological about it. So that was a very, dissatisfaction because I took up for a specific reason and I couldn't find it. So it was when I read the interpretation of Rig Veda in one of the, let me tell you the name, remember, I don't remember the name of the, whatever it was. So then it was opened up in such a manner that there were layers and layers of meaning. It was, one layer talked about the historical perspective as it was at that time, the sociological structure, the economic setup, the Varna system, the interpersonal relationship, the concept of divinity, of gods, of nature worship, and so many things. And when you go on, there is a metaphorical implication in the word, which was for the intellectual class to perceive. And beyond that, there was a science of sound. And this sound particularly was important, as it was later discovered by Panini, Patanjali, and in Madhyama, that these sounds were capable, these were the primordial sounds, and these sounds were capable of putting you into an enlightened state of mind. So when we talk about the Vedic mantras, why is it? Because even if you don't understand those mantras, when you repeat them continuously, so there is a sort of a transformation which is coming up in the body, in the mind. Your perception changes. So it is the science behind it, what the sound can make an impact. So this particular theory was picked up by where the manifestation of language, which is going beyond words, beyond metaphors, into the realm of sound, pure sound. And you must have read somewhere that God is sound. Or even in the Bible, we talk about light and sound as being the first manifestations. So what I'm trying to emphasize is that this was very scientific. It is not just out of everything or anything that it grew up. It had an intense research of our seers, and all the theories, that Indian theories that we talk about, Anandvardhan for that matter, we talk about Abhinav Gupta, we talk about Bharat Muni as the initiator, we talk about Brahma, and so many people, Manu. So what they were trying to do is they had their own experiential knowledge of these things. So it is not a mental correlation alone. It is nothing in abstract. It was an experienced, a thought was experienced, I would say. Thought came out as a part of experience with all, limitations of the language, because this was going beyond the dimension of the language. So they came down to sound, and this was, this was caught up by Anandvardhan, and it was further worked upon by Abhinav Gupta when he compiled his Rasadhani theories. If you could have the next slide, please. Before getting this, we have, suppose we can, if we have to compare, like in terms of comparative analysis, we can talk about Manu. Manu is something you can compare with Plato. He's a moralist, and he is, condemning Natya. Natya is drama. And he has almost the similar reasons to criticize drama as Plato had. And in Yagyavalkya, you must have heard about Rishi Yagyavalkya, he's somebody like Aristotle. And he says that fine arts are very important, and particularly music is very important, because music is something which can put you into a very high state of enlightenment. Enlightenment is very important. When you talk about, when I'll come down to the rest theory, we will talk about that. So, first principle which Bharat had was to instruct in accordance with the Purusharthas. These were the basic Purusharthas: Kam, Arth. You must have heard about them. Moksha. So it was through this training was ordained for the the people at that time, how through dramaturgy or through poetry or through music he would imbibe and have a feeling of flowing along with the current of life as it was at that time. So here we have the sensuous pleasure is not deniable here. And drama is not an act of imitation. It's very different here. Drama here is not an act of imitation. And similarly, if it is not an act of imitation, it should not be presented in actual historical setting, as was emphasized by Aristotle. Aristotle says the historical setting is must. It should be located. The unities. In the unities, he talks about the placement of a specific scene in terms of time, place. So, since it is not an act of imitation here, the actual historical setting is not required. So, the first reference to drama is in the Vedas itself, where you have the reference of Purus. If you could have the next slide, please. The dialogue between Purvas and Urvashi. Now, this is the genesis of drama, and this is something which, if you go by, even you go by the Westerners' date of Rig Veda, that is around 1000 BC. So there, how old drama is. In the dialogues between Purvasas and Urvashi, you conceived the idea of drama. And thereafter, this was adopted by the Shatpat Brahman. And you have there in the slide that it went through Bodhayan, Vradevta, Harivansham, Puran, Vayu Puran, and finally in Vikram Urvashiyam, Kalidas. It's a masterpiece of Kalidas. So this is how it has traveled through. The theme is the same, but how the tradition is continuing. And the White Yajurveda talks about the actors. Yajurveda is the third Veda. So as early as, say around 500 BC or something, the idea was very well known, or rather it was a practicing art at that time. So there is often a comparison between the Greek theatre and the Indian theatre. And most of the people, particularly the Western historians, they try to give precedence to the Greek theatre because it is from there that they have imbibed. It is from there which they have, they take down as the starting point. to be a superior mode. But altogether, it was different. It is a different existence from the Sanskrit theatre. It was basically the basic difference. One of the difference was they talked about tragedy as sublimity. They talk about mimetis. They talked about catharsis, and whereas in our frame of things, comedy was equally important. The romantic plots were there, and tragedy was something which was not appreciated to be presented on the stage. So the first act where the play performance is recorded in Bharata's text is the play which is in which the Devtas, the Brahma himself has come to see how it is being performed. So this might be a bit of myth into it, but the idea is that there was something divine to start with when we talked about the Indian theatre or the Sanskrit drama. Next slide, please. Now, Natya is not an act. It's not an imitation. It is not a mental state. These are all at the empirical level. So West could not penetrate beyond the empirical level, and they thought of drama as imitation, reflection, or pictorial presentation of things, or superimposition of determinate cognition, so many things. Here, it is basically an enactment of your personal emotion. It is through Natya that a link is being established between the actor, the writer, and the audience. It's a very important personal relationship that is being established between these three, and particularly the performing actor and the audience, a person. So, when we talk about the rasa theory, we'll go into the detail, particularly in the Shantaras, how important this relationship is. Next slide, please. Now, rasa is something of which we do not have English equivalent word. It can be an extract, you can call it in terms of an extract, or the resultant, impact of a theoretical scene, of an enactment. And there were 8 rases to start with. And the Shantaras, 9th ras, was brought in by Abhinav Gupta. Somebody is from Kashmir also. So when we talk about Abhinav Gupta, we talk about Kashmir Shaivism. We talk about the theory of Abhaswad. We talk about the theory of Pratibhigya Darshan. Why it is important? Because nobody else could have conceived of the Shantaras, but for somebody who had this philosophical background. What it is basically embedded in a strong philosophical domain. I'll tell you what Shantaras is all about, because you must have heard about all the other rases. Shantaras is basically when all the rases, they combine together, and the feeling of oneness occurs between the actor and the audience, when the audience are able to associate themselves, associate with the emotion with which is being enacted by the actor. Uh, it's not catharsis, it's much beyond that. So that, but he gets into a state of trance. It's transcendental. He gets into a state of trance, and where he is able to become one with the performer of that art. And that oneness brings him into a higher state of comprehension, a higher state of existence, as you might say. And this is called sadharanikaran. The entire thing is called sadharanikaran, where there is a oneness being felt between the author, between the performer of the art and the audience. And that's a very enlightened stage, and which is somewhere close to the enlightened stage which the sages talk about. So this could come against the background of Kashmir Shaivism only, particularly the Pratyabhegya philosophy, where there is an intense oneness between Shiva and the worshipper. We call it sadhak. He's not a worshipper, he's a sadhak here. And that is Pratyabhegya when he becomes Shiva himself. So perhaps it is from here that it is being borrowed. So I hope you have a rough idea what ras is. It is much beyond your empirical knowledge of things. It is much beyond your empirical experiences. It is deeply embedded in metaphysical philosophical doctrines. So, next slide, please. This we have done already. Next one, please. Aesthetics to Pythagoras, and we've talked about that. It was empirical philosophy. West is not going beyond the sense perception. And here we talk about something which is beyond these senses. Now, there are a lot of objections by the West. Most of the scholars, they would say, rather they say, we should be focusing on something which is in our day-to-day experiences, which is not beyond that. So, how do we counter them? We say like somebody is blind. He cannot see. But does that mean that there is no sun? Simply by the blindness of an individual, we cannot deny the identity of sun. So, if that experience is not within your ambit, we do not say that this experience does not exist, or rather this reality does not exist. The idea of Indian philosophy is, why do we call it? Why did Shankar call the word unreal? To my mind, it was basically because it is in a transient stage. It is something which is not going to last forever. Something which is momentary. And this is what we can talk about, the categorical input which the Western scholars had in determining their philosophy, in seeking what is relevant for their, pattern of mind in their system of coagulation, which is something which would appeal to them most. But at the same time, you are denying something, denying a whole existence of such ontological truths which are beyond your sense perception. So this asadharikaran kriya is called de-individualization. Here it is. Next slide, please. Now this is, you have the criticism of imitation. You have the criticism of imitation, where particularly Anandvardhan in Dhyanvalok, most of the criticism is from the 7th to 10th century AD. The most ripe theories were formulated between these centuries, the 7th and the 10th century, from Anandvardhan to Abhinavgupta. It's not, Abhinavgupta is 10th century, it's not 8th century here. Abhinavgupta is 10th century. So, in Dhyanlok, he advises poets to avoid reflection and imitation, as they are soulless. So this can be said about the Western criticism, that it is soulless. If you have read Ganesh Devi talks a lot about the utility of theory, why we should have theory or why we should not have theory. And he talks about amnesia, which was it was sort of a cultural, imperialization. It was a cultural colonization by the West, where they tried to dominate, they tried to show that their culture was much superior to the Indian culture. And in that case, what was done was basically that all the there was a disjunct which was made to emerge between the theories, a sort of a discontinuity. What we had were not allowed to, filter down. So in between, they tried to they stepped in, and they had the import of their theories. We never talked about feminism because we always thought. Now, we don't judge by the present terms of society what we have in modernist day-to-day life. I'm not talking about the contemporary society, but at the time when these things were conceived, we had seers like Gargi. We had seers who composed the hymns in the Rigveda. So, and even in most of the philosophies, they do not talk about sex as being separate. Soul is something which does not have a gender, which is neither male or a female. It is only in terms when it attains a bodic form, it is a male or a female. So we never had this discrimination of men and women. And most of the things like the caste system, which was not there. It was basically the Portuguese who talked about it. They brought in here. The English, they worked very hard to see to it how the society remains disjointed, not united. The Varna system was something which was not hereditary. It was basically on the profession which you chose, that you were to be graded into that 4 Varna system. And the mobility, the vertical mobility was possible. You could, from a lower one, you could get into the higher one by your mere acts and your profession and your approach to life. And similarly, from a higher one, you could fall down to a lower one if you do not practice those ideologies, those essentialities which were there. So, next slide, please. We talked about this, language being a linguistic construct, intrinsically transcendental and symmetrically with reality. And man as never a measure of things, but a nimit. We say nimit matra, an agent. And there was no need to replace him as he was never constructed. There's one more thing, particularly when you talk about the Indian system of knowledge. You talk about Kashmir Shaivism, you talk about the text coming down to us in terms of the Vedantist philosophy, the Sankhya philosophy, the Yoga philosophy. Most of, or even the paintings of Ajanta, Ellora, most of these do not have the author's name. So sort of an impersonality which was very much there. Or if at all there is a name, the author is he's always referring to the higher people above him who have added to the knowledge. And he is basically writing a commentary. Most of the literature is in terms of commentary. Or the original sutras are by somebody, and you have momentous commentaries being written on them. So there's always an acknowledgement that, look, I am not the sole author. Look, I haven't done anything much. It is basically by these great people who had formulated these things, these theories, these sutras, and I'm blessed to have an opportunity in giving a mild commentary about them, adding my part to it. But at most of the other cases, there is no intention whatsoever to leave their imprint. So how, connected and similarly at the same moment disconnected these people were. This is something which Eliot quite laid down in the 20th century. He talks about impersonality as a requisite to fine art. How he says, and in that context, he criticizes Shakespeare's Hamlet also. Why? Because he finds Hamlet to be too direct, making a lot of noise. He says he's making a lot of noise for something, and the source is not that much as is being reflected by Hamlet. So he calls it an artistic failure. So for artistic success, this is something which is very important. What? Impersonality. And here we had a whole tradition, a whole long tradition where deliberately these people were never bothered to show their signatures or their imprints on their work of art. They're totally disconnected from what they were doing. Next slide, please.
Sir, can you please explain what is misconnected? How are they misconnected?
Disconnected, sorry.
So what does it mean actually?
You see, have you read the theory of Eliot? Impersonality?
I know impersonality, not that much.
When you do not get involved in your something, you talk about, okay, I'll give you a comparison. When Shelley says, I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed. So nobody is interested in Shelley bleeding. Fine. Why? Yes. Because nobody is interested in somebody's personal emotion. Until and unless that emotion is universalized, it is generalized and universalized, that it would bring meaning to the rest of the people. Fine. So there is a disconnect. Disconnect in the sense you are there, you are not involved. You are there, you are not involved. Your personal emotions are not being transmuted into your work as it is. I hope
Okay.
I'm able to make express myself.
Uh, uh,
Any other
it-
query?
yeah, on this, like here, I'm not involving my personal emotions, but
Yes.
before in Kashmiri Shaivism, when a artist is performing, you are feeling oneness with the performer. That's
Yes.
audience feels oneness with the performer.
That's
So are
universalization. Ah.
yeah, okay. So are these something similar? Like um,
Yes. Yes. They're similar. They're similar to an extent because it's always the completeness that we talk about.
okay,
We somewhere everything is connected because artist is performing. He
okay,
is performing on somebody else's written text. It is not his words, but he is putting his soul into that performance.
okay.
And for that moment the audience is able to displace the artist and is able to place himself on his footing, and he is able to realize the same emotion which is being enacted. I hope you are
So
getting it now.
Yes, sir. I always thought that it is about the music and the Sanskrit language that we feel so much connected when Shiva does Shiv Tandav Srotam or something. So is it something
Right.
more than that, or that we feel oneness, or is it? I thought it is just the music or something.
No, music can be a means of providing you oneness. It is just an instrument, a vehicle on which you're traveling. Because what happens is, if you go deep into the Indian philosophical system, they're all interconnected. Indian philosophy and Indian literary theory are deeply connected. So, when you are in that state where your worldly thoughts are being suspended, it's not like the way the college makes you suspend your thoughts. When these thoughts are suspended, then you are able to have a more comprehensive or cosmic understanding of the world, of the universe, maybe.
Okay,
And these are the process through drama, how these processes can be activated and how you can attain those stages. In Kashmir Shaivism, when they talk about the Pratibhigya philosophy, is when in intense, meditation is a very small word for that. Meditation is just the beginning. When in those intense practices, you are able to find a completeness, oneness with Shiva. Shiv does not mean the Shiva deity that we talk about. Here, Shiv is the absolute, what Shankar called Brahm.
okay, okay. Yeah,
Are you familiar with these terms?
yeah.
Yeah. So Shiva is the absolute. He is the Brahm, not the bodily form Shiva. Fine. So when you are able to be have oneness with that, and that is because we all these philosophies they say that you are already one, and it is in an act of forgetfulness that you have assumed that you are separate. All the non-dualistic philosophy talks about that. Kashmir Shaivism is also non-dualistic, like the Vedanta philosophy. And they say that you are one, and in that state of forgetfulness, you have thought of yourself as being separate from the entity. And once this forgetfulness is, done away with by intense meditation or certain other practices, you come to the realization of the state which you already are in. So
Yeah.
here is somebody, basically Abhinav Gupta was a scholar and a monk he was indoctrinated in the Kashmir Shaivism tradition. And here he is somebody who, you know, took to literary theory also. And what we see in his theory is basically a manifestation of what he had experienced.
Okay.
I hope I'm able to make myself clear.
Yeah. Yes.
Anything else?
No. No, sir.
Shall we continue?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we talk about the cultural attack. Because this is very important. We were not only subjugated economically, politically, socially, but it was the culture. If you destroy a country, what do? You destroy the country's culture. So the most sublime, hidden attacks were made on the culture so that you get into a state of amnesia. Set so that you say, look, we were basically, our forefathers were, they were nomads, they were barbarians. So how would you do that? Because when your text, uh, your scriptures, they are all belittled. And how would you do that? You would set certain standards. As you do when in terms of, suppose I give you an example. At one time, hockey was something which was manipulated. It was managed by India and Pakistan. They were the best players ever. I'm talking about the World War era. Between the First World War and the Second World War, there was no team to match India, and West simply could not do anything about it. So what they did was they manipulated the rules. If anybody is a hockey player, he would not know. He would know you were not able to, you were not allowed to scoop the ball into the air. It was basically dribbling, and where people like Dhyan Chand, his brothers Ashok, and other people, they were the masters of dribbling. So all the rules were modified to suit the Western mode, to make it more fast. And how would you make it fast? By long passes. How would you make the long passes? By being allowed to scoop the ball into the air. So this is something, not exactly this, but something which they did to the culture also. They made their culture appear to be very modernist, and Indians as people who had no refinement of character, no refinement of taste. They didn't have any literature to back upon. And this is how they belittle our tradition. Now, this was a tradition which had survived the onslaught of the Islamic attack. There were a lot of destruction during the Middle Ages when the profound centers of learning in Bihar, you people from Bihar must be knowing that. They must have seen it in those great universities of that time. Anybody can tell about the universities? The Bihar people? Two of them are located. Vikramshila is one. What is the other one? And the university from where Chanakya taught, Takshashila. So all these universities, they were destroyed. Destroyed means all the books, they were put to sword, the scholars were put to sword. They say that the Nalanda library burned for about a month or something. And there were just about 14 horsemen who went over to the library and destroyed the entire thing. So still, in spite of all these things, they were able to take the onslaught. Because the attack was more on a empirical sort of a way. It was more on the physical aspects of culture. Deep within, the philosophy was still flourishing. So the double attack which the Britishers, the colonial powers, they made was to hit out the culture within us. And so we have. So Ganesh Devi speaks a lot about when he says there's what is the point of having theories at all? And even if you just postulate for a while, you think it out, why do we need theories at all? Why do we need feminism? Why do we need structuralism? Why do we need post-structuralism? Why do we need, what do you call this, Derrida? Why do we need them all? Deconstruction. Deconstruction is something, nothing but it's Buddhism in new bottles, the old wine in new bottles. The first, people to talk about deconstruction were the Buddhist people. It is in the Buddhist philosophy that we have the concept of deconstruction. And what are they doing? They are, rebuilding it. They are patenting it. They are putting into a newer light. Maybe you provide something with a lot of packages, glossy covers, ribbons, this and that, and it looks very attractive. This is exactly what these people have been doing. The problem is that we have not been able to understand it because most of the university seats are manipulated, they are captured by people who have an orientation which is anti-Indian culture. They will talk about the Western because at times I understand it is money also, because you need grants. How would you get grants? You won't get grants unless you talk about their ideology. You talk about what they have done, what they've been doing in a more profound light. So this has been, and more of the people who one of the things which they did was very suicidal for us was to give up Sanskrit. I'm myself ashamed that I do not know Sanskrit properly. I was taught Sanskrit for a couple of years only, and I'm almost illiterate in Sanskrit. Although I use the terminology, I'm getting it through English translations. So this was the greatest destruction which was done was the destruction of the language, of the culture. And how would you do it? You would frame, look, it is an elitist concept, it is the Brahminical language, and this is that. So many such postulates were, invented. And a divide was made so that people do not adhere to their, their traditions. And they simply walked out into the garb of the apish notion of the West. So now we have, we can have the other slide, please. How much time do I have, Sanjay? It is already, Dr. Sanjay?
Yeah.
How much time do I have? Can I continue for another 5-10 minutes?
Yes, you can, no problem.
Or can we have the questions, because it is very, very vast and I would indeed take a lot of time.
I think if we can break it here for questions,
that would be all right.
That will be better, and maybe we can continue with this maybe sometime next week or anytime convenient.
It all depends upon the response that I'm getting, because it might be confusing.
Yes.
And sometimes something new which perhaps these students were never told.
Yeah. So what we can do, we can just break for questions and see what kind of response we get, and accordingly we can decide. So let us just take it on to the students. Yes. Do you have any questions? Please, if you have any queries, doubts, questions, comments that Dr. Sharma has come up with in terms of imitation, the comparison between East and Western philosophy, the universality of emotions that he was talking about, and how these things came on to drama. So any questions, because these are things which you probably will be studying sooner or later.
Sir, I have a question from, I asked earlier also. I have a little more doubt.
Can I have your name, please?
Shivam, sir.
Shivam, right. Where are you from?
Delhi.
Fine. Okay. Go ahead.
Sir, what is, like, suppose a performer is performing in Kashmiri Shaivism or a Western performer.
Don't mix up. Kashmiri Shaivism is a philosophy. When you're talking about performance, it is in terms of drama.
Okay.
Natya.
Okay. So, okay, I might be getting confused. So, if a performer is performing with oneness, with the thing that you talked about, and a Western performer who is performing not with oneness, what is the thing that...
I do not say that the Western performer cannot perform with oneness.
Okay.
I did not say that.
Okay.
So everybody is capable of doing it. It is only how conscious we are of doing it. The difference is we are doing it consciously. They might do it unconsciously and they hit upon something. It's not that salvation or enlightenment or higher states of consciousness are restricted to us only. No, it is not.
Okay.
It is how conscious we are. We were conscious at that time, and this is what one of the major the casualty is, that we have stopped being conscious of what we are doing.
Okay. So, were these performers meditative people or something? Like, how were they able to do it?
You see, meditation is not just sitting down, closing your eyes, and trying to make yourself thoughtless. It is something which you are doing with lot of consciousness. You are feel. Suppose, instance, we're taking bath. So you're feeling the flow of water, or even for instance, you're drinking water, how the water is flowing down gradually up into the epiglottis, into the trachea, and no, not the trachea, into the stomach, and you have a feeling of that. So how consciously you are doing things is important. And when you're conscious of things, you are already in a meditative state.
Yes.
Meditation is a very limited word. It does not speak much. It's again a Western word. We never talk about meditation. The word in our context is dhyan, and dhyan can be of anything. It does not mean that you are concentrating on something, or specifically on gods, or maybe of your deity or something. It can be, you can concentrate on your work. You can do, you get totally absorbed into betting. For instance, when Sachin Tendulkar used to bat, he used to, get, why he could do much better than the others, despite of his little size and other things, was the tremendous amount of concentration that he had. So it's more or less basically the game of concentration. How consciously you are doing things. You are
Yes.
doing at the same time. Look, I'll explain one more thing. Like you're doing something, and at the same time, you are observing yourself doing the same thing. Are you understanding it? No.
Yes, sir.
You are doing
Being in the
something, and at
present.
the same moment, simultaneously, you are the observer and you are the doer both.
I'm being in the present, something like that.
Yeah, perfectly in present. When you can be do such things when you're in the state of presence, in the present state. If you are thinking in terms of past, or if you are flying into future, you'll not be able to do it.
Yes.
Because this is how the thought comes in. Thought comes in. Thought is never of the present. Present is just feeling. So feeling is much superior to thought. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Tell me anything else? Any other
Yeah,
questions?
any comments, any questions? Leon, Dimple, Kunal, Mohammed? Or was it too much beyond your
Oh,
understanding?
I'm sorry if I have. I tried to make it simple, but I think I should have done it further. Keep it more simpler than this. Maybe we come up, because I know this. This feedback is very important for me.
Yes, at least give a comment, give a feedback to Dr. Sharma about how much you understood or what you found confusing.
So you should have
Always.
gone. You shouldn't be like you are saying. Like you should have been more abstract. I think you should have been gone in more details uh, in some of the topics, like citing examples or from the text and all. Uh,
That I could have done, and I will do it if you allow me some more time. If you
yes,
allow me more sessions, I'll do that also.
yes.
Because it's something very introductory. So it's not possible right now for me to get into all these
Huh.
things.
Because there are a
So
lot of terms that like we can search on Google for the meaning, but
ha,
we don't actually understand them if we are not cited with examples. Like now you have given examples, it felt easier to grasp. Without
yeah,
examples, it is tough because the
yes,
terms itself have a very broad meaning, like
definitely they
oneness,
have.
oneness, and all this.
Mhm. I hope I would have been, tete-a-tete, not on the online thing. So I would have perhaps be able to express myself much more clearer than what I've done now.
Yes.
Anyway, so was it too much of a taking, or was that just all right?
It was a
You
good
want me
session.
to
It was a good session.
thank you for
Yeah.
but I just want like what beyond went beyond your comprehension. It's
Some
just
of the
one
terms,
person talking.
oh,
Yeah, yeah. Tell me.
like some terms were there that I did, like catharsis, um, and
Catharsis is there in if you do your Western criticism, if you do your Aristotle properly, you will find catharsis there.
yeah, yes,
I
sir.
thought
I knew that. Yeah,
catharsis you must be knowing. I compared catharsis with the Rus theory.
yeah,
Catharsis is again a bodily. It's not going beyond the body. It is beyond a state of. It's a mental state.
okay,
Catharsis is an emotional and mental state. But here, the sublime rases, particularly the Shant ras, is going much beyond the domain of the body, of the physical body. So,
yes,
but
sir.
these things are not. Let me tell you again. These things are not abstract. Abstract is something which, when you talk about Western philosophy, you try to read them. There is a mental coagulation, a mental perceptions, and things. Those things are abstract. All these things have been experienced by people who wrote them. So it is an experiential philosophy. It is
Okay,
nothing
sir.
abstract about it. It is nothing abstract about it. Because the first, the opposition that we get from the West is, oh, this is so abstract. We cannot, we don't comprehend. We cannot feel it. But if you cannot feel it, it is your problem. I give the analogy of the blind man and the sun. A blind man cannot see the sun, but that does not mean the sun does not exist.
Yes,
So
sir.
there it is. So we should all feel very proud of a very, very rich cultural heritage of critical theories of philosophy that we have in our system, in our country, in our culture. It is nobody's monopoly. It is no caste's monopoly. It is there available for everybody. Most of the Westerners you find they're coming in many of the shrines you would see as place as remote as Hirakan. I've seen many of the Britishers flocking there. So one should be proud of the heritage first of all. Then comes the understanding of how things are. If you are not proud of your heritage, and believe me, you have reasons to be proud of it. It is very, very superior philosophy. I'm not belittling anybody. I have nothing wrong against until and unless they don't hit us, I have nothing against the Western theory. I have nothing against anybody for that matter. But our system is a perfect system. It is a system which is based on intense, um, sadhana. Sadhana in terms of research, you call it, if you don't like the term, by these tremendous seers who experienced each and every minute aspect of these things, and then they try to formulate the theory to an extent because language has its limitations. You cannot carry because the actual experience goes much beyond the language. Language itself is of four parts. Para, have you heard about that? We have four dimensions of language. Madhyama, Para, Bakri, Pashyanti. These are the four categorizations. We talk about when we'll do the language part, we'll do about that. How we talk about the grammarians, how the theories of Panini and you can, why is it that by simply the enchantment of mantras, you are able to elevate your consciousness, you are able to go onto a higher pedestal of understanding the words, of the cosmic realities. Because the power of the words, the sound that is coming in. Yeah. Any other questions?
No, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one person asking. Was it a boring session?
probably they will take time to get these things
Okay.
seeped in,
Okay.
and maybe gradually after a session or two more, may once
Hmm.
they develop that analytical
Oh,
critical understanding of
yeah.
Indian literary theory, then probably because these things probably may sound uh, quite new to them.
Very, very, because, and I tried to give them just an outlook. I never talked about the theories in detail. I
Right.
think in particular, I thought that they would have just an idea of how there is an existence of another system which is more profound, very, very powerful, very meaningful, and still valid despite. And there's a continuation. What do you see in your films? Anybody seen Banaras? There's a film by the name of Banaras starring Nasiruddin Shah and that girl, uh, the one who contested elections from Mumbai and lost on Congress ticket. I don't remember the name. Wonderful movie which talks about these emotions, which talks about the Ras
Urmila Matondkar.
Matondkar. Yes, 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 yes.
Mm.
Wonderful movie that talks about that. So that has been it's a sort of a unrealized continuation of those theories into the cinematic world. Although the West has made a very deep dent, but still things are still there. So that's it.
So, with this, I would like to thank Dr. Sharma for enlightening us on Indian literary theory. So, the takeaway from the session is that he talked about the Indian sensibility and compared it with the Western sensibility, and how aesthetics was given that sensual garb. We find that in the statues of the past, Ajanta and Ellora, he gave those examples, linked it up with our scriptures, and also talked about the limitation of the Western philosophy and also the density of Indian philosophy, that how it goes beyond the Western philosophy. The rasa theory that he touched upon, you're going to read about that in greater detail. So these things have just Dr. Sharma has just introduced you with. So these things will definitely be helpful, and I would request Dr. Sharma to please continue with these sessions for maybe a couple of hours more, so that our students are able to learn these things in greater detail. So it's just not from the point of view of your exams or your course, but also for a broader horizon. So he also touched upon the thank you. So
Thank you.
we'll continue with this session, Dr. Sharma. If you want, you can leave the session.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. So we'll continue with our class because I thought we'll just break for a few minutes and then come back to this. But because of the extended session that went on, I think we'll be continuing with this. Uh, Before I move on to the task for the day today, I would like you people to just be a little more participative whenever we have some guest lecture arranged for you, and there'll be quite a few of these. Already we have had seven of them, including the yesterday session by Dr. Abhilasha. Uh, uh, I think you probably, when you joined, we had one session on 4th, and thereafter another one on, I think it was 11th, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So whenever we have any, say, guest, be attentive